Hello to my favorite YouTubers. Tonight, we are going to take a look at part 4 of the Southern Unsolved Mystery Iceberg Explained. But before we do, I want to take a second to thank the YouTube channel members who have so graciously donated to the channel. Their gratitude and support have kept me motivated to keep working hard on these videos. So to that, I want to thank Victoria, John Dorian, and Lime Slushy. I am much obliged. And remember, if you would like to support the channel, it would be truly appreciated. You can leave a super like or become a member, or leave a donation at the link in the description. Now, without further ado, grab the pimento cheese and crackers, crack open that lid of Big Red. I'm fixing to tell you some creepy mysteries. Amanda Tusing, Arkansas, June 14th, 2000. 20-year-old Amanda Tusing was visiting her fiancé, Matthew Irvin, in Jonesboro, Arkansas. The couple had recently gotten engaged. After dating for a long time, Amanda, or Mandy as her friends and family called her, was hoping that she could become a veterinarian, and after spending the day with Matthew, she stated she was going back to her parents' home in Dale, which is about 45 miles away. But that night, a fierce storm rode in, bringing with it heavy rain. So Matthew tried to convince her to just spend the night, because he didn't want her driving in this bad weather. But Mandy was adamant, and she said she would call him when she made it, and she headed out sometime around 11:30 p.m., but Matt didn't receive that call, and by 1:30 a.m., he began to worry. He knew Mandy's parents had set a 1 a.m. curfew for her, and knew she had plenty of time to make it. His worries become too much, and he would end up calling her parents. Her parents, of course, were also concerned, and her father would set out from his apartment and headed towards Jonesboro, taking the route that Mandy would have taken. Meanwhile, Matthew would leave his residence and meet Mandy's father, Ed, halfway. It wasn't long until Matthew, driving along this lonely stretch of road in the middle of a terrible storm, spotted the car, followed by her father, who showed up shortly later. It was sitting under a well-lit area along the side of the road. Matthew first assumed she had broken down. They would then call the police, who noted that the keys were still in the ignition, and windshield wipers had stopped mid-cycle, and the radio was still playing, and had been set to Mandy's favorite station. They could also see her wallet laying on the passenger seat, and a steel-chilled drink in the cup holder on the dash. That drink was about 3/4 or a half full, and was still pretty cold. Most importantly, there were no signs of a struggle. Mandy's family and fiancé were stumped. So were the police, who would launch a search for the young girl, with help from local volunteers the next morning. But Mandy wouldn't be found that day. It would actually be 3 more days when on June 18th, a resident found her body in a rain-swollen ditch about 12 miles west from where her car was. It appeared as if she had been tossed off of a small bridge into a flooded waterway. And even more curious would be the autopsy, which originally said she had drowned, but this was later changed to undetermined, and there was no trauma and no evidence that she put up a fight. She also had not been sexually assaulted, nor had anything been stolen. Investigators started off in a bad position. The terrible weather that night washed any clues away, and Mandy's waterlogged body prevented the medical examiner from making an accurate autopsy. But detectives believe she had been suffocated, and they came to this conclusion because they found her nasal passages did have water in them, but her lungs did not, meaning that she was dead before she hit the water. The case went cold quickly, and over the next decade, investigators interviewed 200 plus people, and it led to nothing. Detectives have had various theories on what could have happened. All in all, they really had nothing, and since they were totally devoid of physical clues, the investigation has largely had to go on tips. As far as theories go, Mandy's family, as well as a lot of armchair detectives, have one that we hear all too common. They believe that Mandy was pulled over by a police officer, or someone impersonating one. Mandy's mother, Susan, even said in interviews that they always told her if she got pulled over at night to pull into a spot where there was a streetlight. So the theory makes sense, and law enforcement even believe it, because they have given lie detector tests, plus interviewed every law enforcement officer employed in the area at that time, and all of them were cleared. However, detectives do believe a man impersonating an officer, is responsible. The Gowrow, Arkansas. The Gowrow, or some pronunciations, Gowrow, is one of the, if not most popular cryptids in Arkansas. And unlike other cryptids in these icebergs, whose origin is usually nothing more than folklore, the Gowrow finds its origin backed by legit journalism. Actually, its first documentation came via a newspaper, and not just any newspaper. It was the first newspaper in Arkansas, that of the Arkansas Gazette. And on January 31st, 1897, reporter Elbert Smithy would write about the alleged creature, and had another man, Elmer Burris, provide an illustration of it, which was based on an alleged photograph. The story was said to be that of a Little Rock businessman named William Miller, who had been traveling in the Ozarks of northwest Arkansas and passed through the tiny town of Blanco. In this town, he would learn that this creature had been slaughtering livestock and pets, and for some reason, Miller took it upon himself to solve the problem, and he would form a posse that tracked this alleged cryptid back to its lair. In this cave, they found the floor littered with animal skeletons, as well as some human remains. They did not see the monster, however, so they hid and waited for it to come back. When it finally emerged from the lake, it caused the earth to tremble. The men would then unleash a volley of gunfire upon it, which it then perished, but not before ripping up several trees, killing several horses, and tearing off the leg of one of the men. Upon examination of the remains, it was recorded that the creature was 20 feet in length, with 2 tusks, large webbed feet with claws, a row of short horns along its back, and a long thin tail with a blade at the end. Williams would then tell Smithy that they sent the body to the Smithsonian, but it never made it to the museum. Now I have to point out here that the editor of the Gazette at the time, a man named Fred W. Alsop, did not believe this story, claiming that it was a fake. But strangely, he let Smithy continue with publishing the account. The possibility of it being hoaxed hasn't stopped others from researching the cryptid. There's even alleged accounts found that predate this newspaper article, some from as early as the 1880s. One source suggested that this was actually a species of a creature, and not just a monster, with details about young that hatched from soft-shelled eggs as large as a beer keg, and a mother that carried the infants in a pouch. There's even a famous story about an encounter with one in another mysterious place called Devil's Hole in Boone County. The creature is also said to be an omnivore, because in addition to eating animals, it is known to eat apples. So what to make of the Gowrow? Well, if we go by William Miller's account alone, the tusks match up really well with the razorback pig. But he also said this creature came from the lake, so maybe it was an alligator. Regardless, if it was one of these two creatures, some details came about because of mistaken identity and/or because it was flat out embellished. And obviously, the second theory was that it was nothing more than a hoax. Maybe Smithy just thought the newspaper that week was boring, and he wanted to spice it up. Or maybe he just thought Miller's tale was interesting. But it should be pointed out that 4 years before the Gowrow was reported in Arkansas, a very similar creature, called the hodag, was reported in a Wisconsin newspaper. The two cryptids bore very similar characteristics, and it's just possible that the Gowrow was based on the hodag. I even found one source that stated Smithy was from Wisconsin, so it's possible that he just brought the tale with him and changed a few of the details. Andrea Deanne Durham, Florida, February 1st, 1990. 13-year-old Andrea Deanne Durham of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, was asked by her mother to vacuum the apartment, as her mother and sister were exiting the building and planned to be back shortly. Andrea told her mother that she would take care of it, and the two walked out. But her mother and sister would be surprised when they got back 2 hours later and realized the apartment door was unlocked. Opening slowly and looking in, they spied the vacuum standing alone in the middle of the apartment. They would walk in and found no sign of Andrea. Even spookier was all of Andrea's belongings were sitting exactly the way they were when the two had left. It left her mom and sister feeling uneasy, especially since everything seemed fine with Andrea when they left. Her mom, noticing the vacuum was set up, naturally assumed that Andrea must have been interrupted while vacuuming, so they called the police. And unfortunately, Like a lot of old missing person cases, the police showed up and said, yeah, Andrea ran away. And I mean, I kinda see where they got that, because there were no signs of forced entry, and police found out that Andrea had told people she did not like this new apartment that her family had just moved to, so the police told her mother that Andrea would be back soon, but they would keep an eye out for her, and they left. But when time wore on with no sign of Andrea, the police finally decided that maybe something did happen. The delayed search definitely didn't help, and there were 0 leads found. They, of course, looked at local perverts around the neighborhood first, but they were all cleared. The case then went cold extremely quick. The state of Florida would actually put her picture and details on cold case playing cards and distributed them throughout the state. There was also TV appearances, and even an appearance on a music video, and yet, nothing. Not one lead. And sadly, that's it. I mean, there's so little to go on with this case. However, that hasn't stopped theories, and there's basically 2 lines of thought. One is, she simply ran away. Evidence for this is Andrea was not happy at this new apartment her mom had just gotten, but she also had a recent run-in with the law. Although it was a minor run-in, she was basically the lookout for some other girls who got caught stealing change out of cars in a parking lot. She did do community service for it, and it was this trouble that she got into that prompted her mom to move to a new apartment and get away from her old friends. But that's hardly a reason to run away. Besides, none of her belongings were taken. The second theory is the darker one. She was kidnapped, either by some serial offender, or someone she knew, or someone trafficked her. Regardless of which, the suspect was able to gain her trust, which is why there was no struggle, why no witnesses reported hearing anything out of the normal. If it was a serial offender, it's been speculated that it could be connected to Mark Reeb and William Alex Wells III, serial killing stepbrothers, but there's no hard evidence to back it up, although I did find some speculation that Andrea did know both men. Investigators believe that Andrea was in the area for a short time after her disappearance, but after that, no one seems to have any idea what happened to her. Lydia, North Carolina. In 1959, a North Carolina folklorist named Nancy Roberts was collecting stories for a book called An Illustrated Guide to Ghost and Mysterious Occurrences in the Old North State. As she dug through archives and interviewed people throughout the state, she would stumble upon a man with a very interesting story. This story came from an individual named Burke Hardison. Burke would tell Nancy that during the year of 1924, he was traveling home to High Point on a rainy and foggy night. At this time, a bridge ran over Highway 70, and that bridge has since been abandoned, only for another one to be built within view of the original one. Anyways, Burke, who was pretty tired on that drive, would state that as he got within view of the railroad bridge, he would see a woman in a white gown waving him down for help. When he pulled over, she would ask for a ride to get to High Point, and since he was heading that way, he said hop in. Strangely, she would whisper to him that she had just been to a dance and was trying to get to her home, and she did not live that far away. But something strange happened when he got to the place she told him to go to. He would get out and go around to open the door, which was the custom back then, but when he opened the door, she wasn't there. He at first was kind of taken aback. He thought she must have opened the door and ran into the home, but he wanted to be sure. So he knocked on the door, and an unknown woman opened it. When Burke described the young lady hitchhiking, she told Burke that the woman he sought no longer lived, that she had been killed in a car accident at the overpass he claimed to have picked her up years prior, and her name was Lydia. Now it's important to note here that typically this would just be chalked up to folklore, but this woman, or should I say this spirit, has since been spotted by several other motorists over the decades. Now most of these stories don't actually include taking Lydia back to her home. It's usually just people who have seen her walking along, and often looking a bit unsettling, and always in white. Very few have offered her a ride, but when they have pulled over only for Lydia to disappear. Part of this mystery would actually be solved in 2020, when authors Michael Reniger and Amy Greer made a discovery. In a newspaper article from 1920, a story described a crash that left a woman named Miss Annie L. Jackson deceased, and it was later discovered that yes, that L, for her middle initial, did stand for Lydia. Lydia, the pretty lady in this picture, was all of 35 when she was returning home from a dance with her boyfriend. As he came around the sweeping curve on a rainy and foggy night, he lost control and overturned the car, killing Lydia immediately. The driver, James Hutchinson, fled the scene and was arrested a couple of days later. Now I know this phantom hitchhiker story is told in various parts of the country. Heck, it's got variations all over the world. But what makes this one weird is the name of the spirit, Lydia, which was known for half a century before the record of the very real Lydia was found. Which means one of two things. Burke Hardison was the one and only person that remembered that car crash from 30 plus years prior and crafted this one story around it, for some reason, only for it to become a ghost story told over and over for 60 years until the record of the real Lydia was found. Or the spookier possibility that all of these sightings and encounters over the years were legit, and that's how we knew her name was Lydia. Regardless, on May 5th, 2023, a sign was erected at the underpass that recognized Lydia, the very real woman who tragically lost her life, who quite possibly is still wandering the dark, lonely road of this small town in North Carolina. The marker reads, quote, Lydia's Bridge. Since the 1920s, apparition of a young woman has been hitchhiking here, only to disappear when drivers come to her aid, end quote. Old Mike, Arkansas. The small town of Prescott, Arkansas is home to about 3,000 people, which in 1911 was even smaller, and made it more difficult to get a variety of goods. But luckily for this area, a railroad track ran right through the center of town, bringing in supplies and salesmen to the area. One of these salesmen, a man known only by Old Mike, was known to all the townsfolk. He arrived about once a month to sell pens, paper, combs, shoestrings, and threads to homes and businesses near the center of town. He always arrived on the southbound train at 3 p.m. and would then stay overnight, and then reboarded the train the next day at 3 p.m. to leave town again. But on Mike's last trip to this small town, he would go to an outdoor revival in the city park, and it would be a shock to this tiny town when the very next day, Old Mike was found laying underneath a tree where he had apparently died of a heart attack or stroke. The body was taken to a local funeral home where it was then embalmed, and then authorities in the area would search through Mike's belongings looking for some identification, but they found nothing. What they did know was Mike was between 40 to 60, probably closer to 45, spoke English with a little bit of an accent, probably Italian, and he looked Eastern European, and he had suffered some type of injury to his right arm and left leg, which left him using crutches. It's thought that this came about because of a stroke he had suffered in the past. He also had elaborate dental work done. They also knew that he regularly traveled between Little Rock, Hot Springs, Prescott, Texarkana, and Benton. He was about 5'5" and 120 pounds, and he carried a pack made of canvas and leather which held his goods. The town was stumped about what to do with him, as they had no idea who to contact. They decided to display the body at the funeral home in hopes that someone would eventually come to town looking for him and would be able to identify the body. But that never happened. As the years passed, the town began to doubt that anyone would come look for Mike, and it kinda inadvertently turned into a tourist attraction. People from all over came to view the remains. Hey, it was really boring back then. By 1975, the Arkansas Attorney General's office would ask the funeral home to put Old Mike to rest, to which they did, and to this day, no one has ever identified who this man was. But there has been some research done. A writer in the 90s did find that someone at a coroner's jury testified to have seen Mike about a week and a half earlier in a Little Rock court, where he appeared with another man named Pat McFarland. Now this witness claimed McFarland had been arrested for public drunkenness, but according to Little Rock court records, a Pat McFarland was arrested on that day, but he was arrested for disturbing the peace. But the important part is the other man that was with him. Little Rock court records do show that another man did appear in court that day under the name of J.M. Estes. So possibly, The M was for Mike. But the problem here is, this man was arrested for public drunkenness, not McFarlane, bringing into question the legitimacy of this witness's claim. Marguerite Peggy Mayden, Mississippi. April 30th, 1980, in Biloxi, Mississippi. Neighbors of 61-year-old Marguerite Mayden would notice that they had not seen the avid amateur golfer all that day, which was unusual for her because she was often found at the golf course or out in the community. Marguerite, or Peggy as she was known by her family and friends, was well known, mainly as a result of her golfing career. But that day, the neighbors were slightly concerned about her and decided to go check on her. When she did not come to the door, they would call the police, who came to do a wellness check, and I can only imagine that they probably worried about a health scare since Peggy was in her 60s, and I doubt they could have been prepared when they opened the door and seen a trail of blood going from the kitchen to the bathroom. Police also noticed that it appeared that someone tried to clean up the scene. There were no signs of forced entry though, and nothing of value was missing. Only Peggy and her pit bull, along with the '74 Buick Riviera. Police obviously knew foul play was involved and launched the search, which came up empty-handed. But just by chance, her 20-year-old neighbor was attending a convention at a hotel a couple of days later, and this hotel was about 6 miles from Peggy's home, and in the hotel parking lot sat Peggy's car. The neighbor recognized it and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the vehicle and found blood in the liner of the trunk. A hotel security guard came forward and said he seen a white male leaving her car about 1:50 a.m. He was about 25 to 30 years old, 6 foot tall, and 165 pounds with brown medium-length hair. And a week later, Peggy's dog would reappear about 15 miles from where she was abducted, and it was found in a predominantly black neighborhood, which led investigators to believe the white suspect dropped off the dog here to throw off the police. Over the next few weeks, police searched many waterways and other areas for Peggy, but found nothing. Now, as you can see, there wasn't really much for police to go on, but there were a couple of things. For one, there was at least 2 bloody handprints inside the home, and shoe prints from a size 10 boot. There was also a set of pajamas and bathrobe missing from the home, leading police to believe that Peggy was getting ready for bed when she was abducted. There was also a collect call placed from a payphone in Florida to Peggy's home phone on the night of the disappearance, and the call was answered. The call lasted from 1:36 a.m. to 1:42 a.m., and if we go back to the hotel security guard's account, he said the suspect exited about 1:50 a.m., which means he would have had to made it to the hotel in 8 minutes. And police tested this theory and were able to drive it in 7 minutes. But one problem with this was the fact that the suspect took time to clean up most of the crime scene, so there's no way he had time to do that, plus make the drive to the hotel, which has led investigators to the conclusion that 2 men were involved, and for some reason, the man left behind answered the phone call from Florida, which is strange. But Peggy has never been found and was most likely murdered. But by who and why? It is important to note here that Peggy's husband was long deceased, and she had no known love interest, nor does she have any known enemies. There has been an attempt to tie her disappearance to the criminal organization Dixie Mafia, who was involved in the narcotics trade as well as illegal gambling. Although detectives interviewed many members about Peggy's disappearance, they got nowhere. But at least one member, Steve Romano, was arrested in Florida with Peggy's phone number in his pocket. Another Dixie Mafia member, who was a hitman, supposedly, Ricky Brawley, was thought to have been the man that dropped Peggy's car off at the hotel. However, he was killed in an altercation with the FBI before he could be interrogated. But the question remains why, and it's a question that can only be speculated at. Some think that the charity golf tournaments Peggy had been playing in were really just ways for the Dixie Mafia to embezzle money, and Peggy reported them, but that is all speculation. Hornet Spook Light, Missouri. You knew I had to do it. I had to put a spook light on here. This is one of the more famous ones though. The Hornet Spook Light, also known as the Joplin Spook Light or Tri-State Spook Light. It's actually located in the small town of Quapaw, Oklahoma, but but it's actually seen best and most often from the east, in Joplin, Missouri. More specifically, the tiny hamlet of Hornet, Missouri. According to legend, it was first seen by Indians along the Trail of Tears in 1836. The first official report, however, wasn't documented until 1881. The ball of fire is often described as being between the size of a baseball and basketball, dances and spins down the center of the road at high speeds, and hovering above treetops before it disappears. Others have stated seeing it sway side to side like a lantern. It is also said to be orange and looks like a fireball, usually appearing between 10 p.m. and midnight. Of course, the light is surrounded by numerous legends. Some say it is the light of a miner whose cabin was attacked by Indians when he was away, and when he returned, he found that his wife and children were missing, and his spirit carries a lantern looking for them to this day. Another version says that an Indian chief who was decapitated in the area continues to search for his head via lantern. Sightings are pretty common, and there's numerous pictures that have been taken. Even a few people have claimed to see it pass over and felt the heat off of it as it passes. And there are many theories. Reflecting car lights and billboards are one, will-o'-the-wisp is another, and swamp gas, which is the last refuge of skeptics that can't explain something. But the headlights of cars driving in the area seem to be the main theory at this point, and actually has been since it was demonstrated in 1936 by several experiments. Although, I wonder how lights 5 miles away are being blamed. And it's also worth noting here that paranormal believers have pointed out that the stories of the spook light run back to before the invention of the automobile. Georgia Raptor. On July 25, 2008, at around 3 to 3:30, an 18-year-old young man, who gave only the name Y. Phillips, would disclose of a weird experience he had hunting in the Georgia woodlands with his grandfather. According to him, they were out on his grandfather's land, which consisted of grassy plains and woodlands, and they made their way down a little rocky road to a site where deer often were seen. As per the norm at night, there were lots of sounds throughout the forest. They would ignore most of them and remain quiet so they didn't scare the deer off, but then suddenly, they would hear an unusual noise that they had never heard before. Even his grandpa, who had spent many years as an outdoorsman, was spooked. His grandfather would raise his finger in front of his mouth to let his grandson know to remain quiet. Phillips would state that he heard a lot of movement and more noise, but it was noise that he could not describe. But he kept listening to the sounds, and then suddenly, something came walking slowly out of the bushes and onto the road about 150 yards in front of them. The two remained frozen, as a raptor, looking very similar to the one from Jurassic Park, walked out in front of them. He described it as having a long stiff tail, walking on 2 feet, and had 2 short arms. It looked lizard-like, and had a huge claw on both of his feet and smaller claws on his arms. It was around 5 feet tall at the shoulders. The two men hid behind the bush as it raised its head up in the air and started to sniff around. After sniffing, it made those strange sounds again, and it turned and ran off into the bushes. Him and his grandfather waited until they felt safe again and made their way back to the truck and then left the area. On the ride home, the two decided they should not tell Grandma because she would think they were crazy. And that was basically all of the story. But the first thing that stuck out to me about this one is the author stated they were out hunting between 3 and 3:30, and I took that to mean PM. But when he stated that he heard these sounds at night, I realized him and his grandfather were hunting at 3 a.m., which is illegal, as you can't hunt deer at night. So that paints the whole story as something sketchy to begin with, but it also opens the door for a bit more believability, because it's just possible these two men really did see something. Probably not a raptor though. A lot of the speculation is these men just seen a big turkey in the middle of the night at 150 yards away, and the shadows played tricks on them, making them think that it was much bigger than what it was. The other theory is much simpler. It was just a straight up fabrication. Shannon Nicole Paulk, Alabama. On the Thursday morning of August 16, 2001, in Prattville, Alabama, a woman named Marie Stroud would head off to work, leaving her 2 daughters at home on summer vacation from school. the eldest being Lisa, who was left to babysit her younger sister, that being 11-year-old Shannon. The family lived in a mobile home park of a small farming town and basically knew all of the neighbors. Shannon was friends with nearly all the kids that lived there and also knew their parents. And on that morning, Shannon got up early to go play outside with some of these kids without telling her sister. And when her older sister woke up at 9, she wasn't particularly worried, as it wasn't unusual for Shannon to spend the whole day out playing only to come back that night. When Marie returned from work that evening, she realized Shannon was not home for dinner, but she didn't think much of it at first. But when she didn't arrive back by dark, she started to get nervous. And by 9 p.m., after not being able to locate her, she would call the police. And props to the police, who took the case very seriously, launching a task force almost immediately to find the 11-year-old, yet they found no sign of her. Shortly under a month later, the devastating terror attacks of September 11th would occur, and basically any media coverage of the missing girl evaporated. But police and her family kept focused on the task at hand, but sadly, there just wasn't any sign of her. That would change on October 6th, nearly 2 months after Shannon disappeared, when rabbit hunters found the remains of her body. She had been bound with a rope and put into a black plastic bag. The remains had been set in a wooded area on public hunting property about 10 miles north of Prattville. One of the hunters would eventually state in an interview that he had passed the bag multiple times and assumed it was trash before he finally got curious enough to check it out and see the remains. Now the disappearance was a murder, and police still had zero clues, and the case went cold. Yet they did have a theory. Shannon was known to be extremely kind and almost naive. She helped her neighbors in the area and was known to be a good kid. It's for this reason, investigators have stated, that Shannon almost certainly voluntarily went with someone. Now, if she knew that person or not is another question, but that person took advantage of her trust. In spite of this case being cold, the task force met regularly. By 2016, the Alabama Bureau of Investigation's Code Case Unit began working on this case exclusively, and early that next year, a special investigative grand jury took a look at the case and re-examined the evidence. The first grand jury of its kind in the county in 25 years. One thing that came out was something about a sketch that had been drawn years earlier when a young girl had come forward saying she saw the man with Shannon before she disappeared, which is great, right? Well, now this young girl, who was a young adult, and came to the grand jury and admitted she made the entire thing up to try and help the police find Shannon, just an honest mistake from a scared child, which set the investigation back to square one. Over the years, there have been a few persons of interest. Some of these people have been ruled out. Others never had the key piece of evidence to make an arrest. Over 20 years later, we seem to be no closer to knowing who killed Shannon. Jefferson County John Doe, 2009, Kentucky. Just after midnight on December 3, 2009, Louisville police were called to a location where gunfire had been heard. This area was the Preston Oaks apartment complex. When officers arrived, they found a man laying outside his apartment with multiple gunshot wounds, and he would be officially pronounced dead at 12:52 a.m. at the Louisville hospital. When police started searching for a name, they found several forms of identification in his apartment, all which were later proven to be fraudulent. Police then went through the cell phone found in his apartment and found a selfie he had taken, which you can see here. Although, it should be noted, police have stated they're not even sure this phone belonged to him. The man is believed to be between 30 and 40 years old, and most likely not from the US, being native to Mexico, Honduras, or El Salvador. He was also about 5'3" to 5'4" and 130 pounds. Detectives did find some local Spanish speakers in the area who knew of the man, but they did not know his real name. They stated that they believed he had mentioned having family in West Palm Beach, Florida. 5 people in total were arrested in relation to his murder, and the youngest being a 14-year-old girl, and it's believed that he was killed after resisting their robbery attempt. All 5 suspects did not know who the man was, as he was just a random target. Close to 15 years later, and this man has still not been identified. Gregory Mann, Texas, May 10th, 1997, in Wichita Falls, Texas. 20-year-old Gregory Mann, who went by the name Keith, would go to his job at a local car lot, where he ended up selling 2 vehicles that day, with plans to deliver one of these within the next few days. After that good day at work, Keith would leave, but not before borrowing a red Ford Mustang, which is one of the good things about working at this dealership, because this particular place would loan out vehicles to help market them to potential buyers, basically a way to advertise for free. He would also take a gasoline voucher to fill up because he had no money. He would stop at his apartment and called his fiancée and made plans to meet her the next day. But later that evening, Keith would meet up with a couple of friends before stopping at a gas station at 10 p.m., where they were all captured on security camera. The guys then departed to McDonald's to get something to eat before going mudding in one of the other guys' vehicles. And if you don't know what mudding is, it's where you get into a Jeep or a truck or some kind of 4x4 vehicle and then go off-road and find these mud pits and drive through them and try not to get stuck. After returning from mudding, they would begin to clean the vehicle up at a local car wash. Keith would tell his friends that he was supposed to meet someone at 12:15 a.m., but did not mention this person's name, or where they were even meeting, which was a bit odd. But his friends didn't push for more info, and instead drove Keith home around 11:45 p.m., where they seen him walking up the stairs to his apartment, yet they didn't actually see him enter. Regardless, they left. Later that morning, Keith's fiancée went into the apartment and noticed his work clothes were still laying on the bed, indicating he had not spent the night there. She contacted his parents, immediately knowing something was not right. His father did not wait long to file a missing person report, doing so that day, but it would get more worrisome, because his parents would find Keith's loaned out Ford Mustang abandoned in a church parking lot near their home, a place where Keith was known to park. They noticed that the vehicle's trunk was partially open and a side panel was lowered inside the compartment. The interior had been cleaned, and nothing of Keith's was in the car, except for an audio cassette. The doors were also locked, but the alarm was turned off. Obviously, the police were contacted, who had already started their investigation. There has been a lot of speculation over the years on exactly where and what Keith and his friends were doing that night before his disappearance. For one, in addition to getting food, they also picked up some booze, and in addition to stopping at the car wash, it's believed that they stopped at some other unknown locations, although this has never been elaborated on. There are basically 2 main theories in this one, and one smaller one. The first is that car lot where Keith worked was alleged to be heavily involved in the narcotics trade, and it's possible that Mustang he borrowed had drugs in it, unbeknownst to Keith, which is why the trunk and compartment were opened, which was all an attempt to get to those said drugs. Yet, that doesn't explain the meeting at 12:15 a.m. that Keith had, unless he was also active in the drug trade. But another theory is that Keith got killed while mudding with his young friends, who had been drinking at the time and could have covered it up. This is less likely though, since one of those friends took and passed the polygraph, along with both friends' accounts of what happened have not changed in the 20+ years. There is one final theory that I even hesitate to mention because it seems so out there, but there's a theory that suggests that Keith was meeting a girl that night for a rendezvous in his car, and this girl was actually his stepsister, which led to an altercation with his father. But there are variations of this rumor that he was meeting a married woman and the husband had an altercation with him that led to his death. This would explain why the car was in the church parking lot. However, these are deemed to be the less likely theories. Mr. X, 1972, Texas. On December 11th, 1972, in Cleburne, Texas, a farmer out working in the field would notice vultures flying around a wooded portion of his property. At first, he paid it no mind, but he would eventually get curious and decide to walk out and see exactly what it was these scavengers were circling. It was to his shock that he would find the remains of a young man who had apparently been shot in the chest. The farmer would call authorities, who went to the scene. It was quickly established this unidentified man had been shot twice in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol, a gun described as inexpensive and ineffective at a distance. The man was thought to be between 16 and 24, 5'6", and 110 pounds, with short curly brown hair, and he had been dead for about 4 days. There were no clothes on the remains, which led early investigators to believe that he had been stripped after the murder, although Little in the early investigation could be gained because the body had been damaged so badly by the birds. Some parts of the body were never recovered. Detectives soon deduced, though, that Mr. X had not died at the scene and was instead killed elsewhere. They would then take his fingerprints, which didn't find a match. The case quickly went cold, but in 1992, a reporter in the area would meet with an anonymous source who said the murder had been done by drug dealers and that it was done as retaliation. Retaliation for what remains unknown. However, this may have all just been someone looking for attention, because the mystery was reassigned to a cold case unit in 2012, and they come up with a whole different theory. It is now believed by investigators that this man had been killed while he was in the nude and caught in a, quote, compromising situation, end quote, and that the clothes had not been removed after death like previously believed. The compromising situation could be varying things, although it's not hard to imagine it was probably something of a sexual nature. It's also believed the man wasn't from the area and was just traveling through for work or for another reason. The DNA Doe Project is currently involved in the case, trying to find relatives through genealogy. Investigators hope that if they can identify the man, finding a suspect will then be possible, provided the suspect is still alive. If so, he would be around 70. Pocahontas Parkway, Virginia. We've all heard that cliche that if you build something on an Indian burial ground, the place will no doubt be haunted. Now, most of the time, this is nothing more than urban legends. But when Virginia started construction of a highway known as the Pocahontas Parkway, well, they would put that legend to the test. The Parkway was supposed to be a grand highway that would connect I-95 to Chippenham Parkway 150 and I-295, which led to Richmond International Airport. This would allow a direct connection of the major highways to the airport without having to go through Richmond. A great idea, right? Well, shortly before the construction started, archaeologists from the College of William and Mary looked over the area, which they knew historically were the lands of the Powhatan, and after some excavating, they were proven right, finding artifacts that dated as far back as 3500 BC. Not to be dissuaded though, the Commonwealth of Virginia continued on its construction, right on top of a Native American burial ground. The project was hit constantly with issues, one of the worst being when 2 of the workers died during the construction. Then the contractor realized that the highway would need deeper foundations, which caused it to overrun its budget. So an idea was hatched. The road would become a toll road, and this would make up for the massive loss of money during construction. However, putting a toll on the road caused many people to just straight up avoid it, which never made up for the financial losses incurred. But before I jump ahead into the financial part, let's talk about the paranormal. It started on July 15th, 2002, in the dead of night, after the bridge finally opened. A truck driver coming through would spot 3 Native American men in the middle of the highway blocking the road. They were holding torches and dressed like Indian warriors, headdresses and all. As he blew his horn and passed on through, he seen 2 more on the other side of the road. The trucker assumed it was just Native American protesters, so when he stopped at the toll plaza, he let the worker know what was going on. So that toll booth employee contacted the police, who came to the area and found no one. But this wasn't the only instance. People continued to report seeing these natives on the side of the road. Many others reported hearing war cries and drums during the night. Toll workers reported hearing banging noises from the buildings and even seeing dark figures moving around. One man even walked off his first night on the job, claiming it was too spooky. A local reporter, Chris Dovey, spoke to police and toll workers, who both stated that there were instances of Indian warriors seen on the road and on horseback. Dovey would eventually go to investigate with a Virginia State Police spokeswoman, who both stated they heard screams, drums, and other noises, although some skeptics have blamed the drum sound on the flying of ducks nearby. In addition, there were instances of people thinking they had heard or seen a car approaching the toll booth, only for the vehicle to disappear. It got so bad that Henrico County officials had to confirm that they knew about the issues but could not identify what people were hearing or seeing. Now we jump back to the financial issues. The contractor that was losing money on the highway eventually sold it to an Australian company called Transurban, who thought that with the growth of Henrico County, they could turn the project into a profit. But Henrico County never grew, and I have to wonder if it's because people heard about the werewolf of Henrico, which we discussed in a previous video. Regardless, Transurban wrote off the venture as a complete loss. So that's left us with the theory that Transurban made up all these stories about the ghost in order to get people out there and looking and driving through the area because they knew they would have to go through the toll booths. And this was an effort to make up for their losses, while others still believe that this was a true paranormal event. Thunderbird, South Carolina. Remember on the Mega Iceberg series where we discussed possible pterodactyl sightings in the state of North Carolina? What if I told you it has been spotted in South Carolina as well? Because apparently it has been. The first modern day sighting, at least recorded one, goes back to 1989, somewhere between Greenville and Florence, when a woman named Susan Wooten was traveling Highway 20 and passed through a wooded and swampy area around 3 p.m. She noted the creature had a wingspan of 12 to 15 feet, no feathers, leathery wings, and an appendage behind its head, and had a long tail distinguishable from its feet. And although there's not much recorded about this event, Susan did leave us with a sketch. The next major sighting came from the summer of 2004 and was way more detailed, when a couple driving towards Myrtle Beach would report hearing a loud flapping sound described as, quote, like someone's laundry had come off the line and was getting blown around, like a big bed sheet getting hit by a gust of wind, except we were in the woods and there were too many trees around for it to be laundry blowing around, end quote. Soon, a large white pterodactyl-like creature was seen flying after their car. After the two made it to safety, they reported finding a grayish, snotty stained smear over the driver's side window. But this wouldn't be the last sighting, because in 2013, a new report surfaced, taken from the phantomsandmonsters.com website. Quote, it had leather-like wings and was almost as big across as the windshield. I did not get a good look because it was dark, but it had almost orange-reddish eyes and swooped up before it smashed into the windshield of the car. The whole time I was pumping the brakes, afraid it was going to smash into the car. I told my parents, but they tried to convince me that it was a bat. But I told them, no, it was way too big. Then 1 year later, my dad told me he saw the same thing, flying towards the windshield of his car on the same road and same spot. My brother also saw it in the backyard as he was taking out scraps, end quote. I don't really know what to make of this one, but it is interesting that this same creature has been spotted throughout the Carolinas. Does that add more validity? You be the judge. The Angel of Ava, Missouri. Finally, a nice mystery. In the small town of Ava, Missouri, where about 2,800 people make their home, and were just coming out of the Great Depression, things were improving, but it was still a pretty tight fit for most, especially in small southern towns, which makes this next one strange, because in early 1940, either January or February, a woman named Mrs. E. Lawson received $100 in the mail with a letter merely signed "An old-time friend." That may not sound like much now, but that was about the equivalent of $2,200 in today's money. And keep in mind, this is right when everyone was coming out of the Great Depression. As far as the person signing "old-time friend," Mrs. Lawson assumed it was someone she knew that was doing something nice for her and just wanted to be sneaky about it, and figured when the time was right, this person would come forward and let her know that they had sent the money. But this person never came forward. Mrs. Lawson would then go to the bank to see who had sent the cashier's check and discovered the person had used her last name, Lawson, meaning this person knew that she would try to track down who sent it. And if that was just a one-off, it wouldn't be that big of a mystery. But the Angel, as this person would soon be called, started firing off money to numerous people in town, ranging from $20 to $150, or adjusted for inflation, about $440 to $3,200 in today's money. And this person eventually stopped sending cashier checks altogether and just started sending cold hard cash. Officially, there were 15 people that were known to get these monetary gifts, but there were most likely many more who just never told anyone about it, because at the time, a lot of these people were still receiving government assistance, again, because of how rough the economy was at the time. And these people receiving benefits were rightfully afraid of the government finding out that they had received this much cash and then taking away their government assistance. So it's almost a given that some of the people remained quiet about it. Others thought it was a scam and wondered why it would be happening to them. but some of the ones that received it were in desperate need. One lady was able to pay off the taxes to her home, which kept her from losing it. Even the mayor received a gift, with a note that encouraged him to keep up the work on the sewer project he had just initiated, while one man didn't need the money, was given $100 with a note that said, "Make someone happy," to which this person bought groceries for a needy family of 4. The story then became a national headline, but by May, the last documented gift arrived, and while we don't know who all got these gifts, the bigger mystery is, who was sending them? That person never came forward, and we have no motive other than kindness. The person would have had to been well-to-do though, and he or she certainly had to be well acquainted with Ava's citizens and their needs. Janie Sharp, Mississippi. In 1910, the Sharp family lived in the Royal Hill community in Winston County, Mississippi. The small neighborhood had a post office, 2 general stores, a 2-room schoolhouse, and a Methodist church. It was typical of these old farming communities in the South, a place where life seemed innocent. But on July 12th of that year, this small town would lose that innocence. 18-year-old Janie Sharp had been helping her mother clean and straighten up the house before making the 1.5-mile walk to pick up mail and goods at the general store. She did make it there and was seen leaving the store at 3 p.m. by several people, but by late that afternoon, she had still not arrived home, and her mother grew concerned and walked to the store looking for her, but found nothing. As night approached, people from all over the area formed search parties and looked for the young lady. About this time, her father contacted the county clerk to see if they had issued her a marriage license. He feared that she had eloped. Now that's really strange, because Janie's fiance Earl was actually there helping with the search, which means her father must have suspected there was another man. Regardless, the search party found nothing and stopped at dark and planned to meet back in the morning. However, Janie's brother kept searching and walking along a creek, and finally found his sister at 2 a.m. Her throat had been slashed, and she was struck in the head, and there were signs of sexual assault. Since there was no town doctor, a dentist was summoned and did the best he could at recording the nature of the wounds. Later that morning, the sheriff went to the scene and found signs of a scuffle where a struggle had taken place. It was thought that Janie was taken from the road, assaulted, escaped and ran a short way before being captured again and brought back and killed. As far as suspects go, there was one that quickly stood out, that of Swinton Permenter. He was about the same age as Janie, and he had been swimming not far from where she had been abducted. He was also acting odd during the search, always directing searchers not to look in the area where Janie was eventually found, because he stated he had already looked there, and he also seemed disinterested in the search. But when he heard a bloodhound was being brought in, he was overheard to have said that it would track him down because he had been out searching for Janie, which sounded awfully suspicious. He was then seen racing home to change and washing up on the porch. Meanwhile, the bloodhound arrived and was taken to the area of the struggle, and the dog picked up a scent and traced it all the way back to Swinton at his parents' home. The sheriff would then search his discarded clothes and found a handkerchief that clearly belonged to a woman, and that's all they needed to arrest him. It was still basically circumstantial evidence, but the case went to trial, and he was found guilty and sentenced to death. He would appeal it to the state Supreme Court, who ordered a retrial. This trial would be held in a different location, but during the time waiting for the new trial, something strange happened. Many people involved in the case now started to doubt Swinton's guilt, and to make things worse, once the second trial started, Swinton's brother Walter would be murdered by a shotgun blast as he went out to get water. It seemed the town was on the verge of civil war. Finally, the trial started, and it all basically came down to the handkerchief, that which Swinton was found in possession of and was believed to be Janie's. But Swinton had a good excuse about that. Basically, his story was, he was given that handkerchief on the 4th of July when his brother Walter, who was now dead, had picked it up at a picnic and asked Swinton to give it back to its rightful owner. But Swinton never found that person and had just forgotten to discard the handkerchief. Furthermore, the defense produced the same exact type of handkerchief, which was widely sold, and many women in the area owned the exact same type. The defense would also call several witnesses that poked holes in the prosecution's case, with many of them giving Swinton an alibi during the time of the murder, and Swinton per mentor was found not guilty, and Janie's murder would never be officially solved. Gloria Colita Ghost Ship, Alabama. In 1939, a man named Reg Mitchell, the captain of the Gloria Colita, was involved in a venture that saw him shipping rice to Cuba, picking up sugarcane, taking that sugarcane back to Alabama, loading it up with lumber and or rice, then returning back to Cuba and South America. The trip was grueling and exhausting, but for Mitchell, the man nearly 7 foot tall, it paid the bills. But on one of these particular trips, Mitchell would load up with rice in British Guiana and sugar in Havana, and then sail to Venezuela, and here's where things got weird. When he landed, for a reason unknown to this day, he fired his entire crew and replaced them with a local Spanish one. He then set sail for Mobile, picking up another load of lumber to sell in Cuba. He then left the port on January 21st, 1940, yet he never showed up in Havana, and 2 weeks after the Gloria Colita departed Mobile, a U.S. Coast Guard airplane spotted the ship floating about 150 miles offshore in the Gulf Stream. The pilot was able to assess that the ship had been damaged. The rigging and rudders were gone, and it was completely empty, except for the ship's only dog. It was eventually towed back to shore, and rumors to this day say that food was on the table in the cabin, but that might just be to add to the legend. But this disappearance has led to what I like to call the southern version of the Mary Celeste. What happened to Captain Reg Mitchell and his men has never been fully explained, although there's been a few theories. Some say that the Spanish crew rose up and killed Mitchell, for some reason, and then died themselves on a smaller boat trying to make it back to Venezuela. Crazier theories suggest that the Nazis, who were using U-boats in the Caribbean at the time, could have captured Mitchell and forced him to act as their guide. And I mean, that sounds a little out there, but this was based on reports of a tall, dark man, not in uniform, visible on the deck of a German submarine. A more down-to-earth theory suggested that due to the Colita's rigging and rudder, it was most likely that 100-foot waves broke over the ship, washing the entire crew away. To me, the weirdest thing about this case is, why did he fire his entire crew in Venezuela? It seems a bit odd. Also, I don't get how this one is not more popular. Dead Children's Playground, Alabama. Maple Hill Park in Huntsville, Alabama is much like any other playground. That is to say, it has a swing set, a climbing apparatus, etc. But this playground is a tad different. Let's first start with the fact that it's surrounded on 3 sides by limestone, which has caused a shadowed appearance all over the area, which makes people feel a little bit uneasy. But the real spooky part is the numerous passerbys to this park who have stated going by and seeing the swings moving up and down by themselves as if someone is pushing them. Others have reported seeing orbs or spectral figures moving about, while even more have stated to have heard the sounds of children laughing and calling out, even though none are in sight. This usually occurs at its peak period, between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. But why would something haunt a playground of all places? I'm glad you asked. Maple Hill Cemetery adjoins the playground, and this cemetery is special in the fact that it is the resting place of many children who died in Huntsville during the 1918 Spanish flu. According to local legend, these children, or their spirits I should say, come out after dark and run and play, which paranormal believers state that it explains the shadows and orbs, as well as the swings moving by themselves and the sounds of children being heard. However, skeptics point out that orbs and pictures are nothing more than dust particles, and that the rest of the story is just urban legend, but I will let you make your mind up on this one. Old Green Eyes, Tennessee. If I said to you, name the bloodiest battle in the Civil War, you would no doubt say Gettysburg, and you would be right. But what if I said, name the second bloodiest battle? Most people probably couldn't, but it was the Battle of Chickamauga, which took place in southeast Tennessee and northern Georgia on September 19th and 20th in 1863, which was an awful battle that was an absolute bloodbath. And that might be why that a cryptid that is said to be attracted to devastation showed up there shortly after the battle. This cryptid, which is said to be much more like that of a ghoul, was reported by other soldiers and people after the battle to be moving amongst the corpses near Snodgrass Hill. It was a beast with eerie green glowing eyes and a huge deformed jaw, with terrifying fangs protruded. And if it was just this one appearance, I would say that it was just a coping mechanism for the people that witnessed so much death. But this creature has been spotted more than once and over a century later. The most famous encounter came from a park ranger named Edward Tenney, who during an interview in 1981 said he was going through the park around 4 a.m. sometime around the year of 1976 when he felt a chill run over his body. In that moment, he looked out and seen a green-eyed being stepping out into the darkness. Quote, "When it passed me, I could see his hair was long like a woman's. The eyes, I'll never forget those eyes. They were glaring, almost greenish-orange in color, flashing like some sort of wild animal. The teeth were long and pointed like fangs. I didn't know whether to run or scream or what. Then the headlights of an approaching car came blazing through the fog, and the thing disappeared right in front of me." End quote. Another resident said that she encountered the creature on a cold, foggy night in 1980, just getting off of work and taking a shortcut through the park. Quote, "It was raining and foggy, and I was going real slow. I was going through the S-curve past Water Tower when I saw something big in the road about eye level, and all I could see were these big green eyes. It was so foggy, I couldn't see a body. I got closer and it just disappeared." End quote. And while this could also be classified as paranormal, there seems to be more than enough people that have reported it to be a creature and not a spirit. Some have even said that it appears to be a panther or a tiger or some kind of cat, while others describe it as vaguely humanoid. Some drivers have also told stories about seeing headlights that appear to be green, and as they get closer, they get brighter and bounce up and down, weave side to side, only for the driver to pass and see what appears to be bright green eyes. So what are people seeing? As mentioned, if it was just the early accounts, I would say that maybe it was those guys trying to come to terms with all the carnage they seen, maybe some form of PTSD. But since the sightings have continued, well, one suggestion offered that it's nothing more than deer, whose eyes appear yellowish green at night. Others suggest that it is a real undiscovered animal, while others suggest that it's some type of evil spirit. And finally, some chalk it up to nothing more than urban legend. Matthew Wade Crocker, Arkansas. On February 12, 1983, a woman named Mary Crocker would give birth to a baby boy in Van Buren, Arkansas. She would name this boy Matthew Wade Crocker, and although she was happy to give birth to a healthy baby, life was stressful as a single mom, as Matthew's father was currently locked up, leaving Mary to do her best to try and raise the children alone. Now, data on this case is a little scarce, so some of the pieces are missing or contradict each other. What is known is that Mary was a single mom with multiple children, either 3 or 4. Regardless, it's safe to say there was a strain on the young mother. But luckily, Mary had a friend who told her that he knew a woman that could help her while she was in town. This woman was named Kathy Johnson, and again, it's not explained how this man knew Kathy or Mary, or even how well he knew either woman, but he did introduce the two. Now, Kathy Johnson, according to most sources, was a rodeo worker in Fort Smith, about 10 miles away, although some sources state that Kathy was a carnival worker. Regardless, she was on tour and needed a place to crash for about a week, and agreed to help Mary with her children in exchange for letting her stay. And during that week, on June 9th, Mary would have a party at home. How big or small this party was is not recorded. However, there was alcohol involved. After the party, all laid down for sleep. And I should mention here that some sources state nothing of a party, and instead states that Matthew was being fussy and crying, and Kathy offered to stay up and get him to sleep so Mary could get some rest. Regardless of which source is true, the next morning when Mary awoke, she walked in to check the crib where Matthew was last seen sleeping with his 1-year-old sister, and Mary did not see her newborn son. Panicked, she quickly looked for Kathy, who was also gone. She then looked outside, thinking maybe she had stepped out for a second. It's then that she noticed the vehicle was missing. And again, because of scarce sources on this case, I'm not sure who the vehicle belonged to, but at least one source said that it belonged to a carnival worker that Kathy knew and that she had borrowed it from. Anyways, at this point, Mary knew that she had been duped. She quickly went to the police to file an abduction report. They did open a case, and I mean, it was obvious. They knew Kathy had abducted Matthew while the rest of the family was asleep. Investigators would eventually find the missing car at a rest stop in Sallisaw, Oklahoma, about 30 miles away. Inside, they found no trace of Matthew or Kathy. Detectives had little to go on, but Mary did tell them that Kathy mentioned having 2 children of her own that had died shortly after birth and said they would have been 9 and 6 around that time. But detectives had no idea if this was true or not. Kathy was also said to be 26 years old, 5'4" with blonde hair, in spite of the sketch having black hair, and a chipped front tooth. Maybe most surprisingly was the woman had some pretty identifiable tattoos. One was a green/yellow star on the left side of her chest, a unicorn on her upper left arm, and Kathy tattooed on her upper right arm. Which brings up the question, was Kathy her real name? Detectives are unsure, but they have stated she may have went by Judy, because how many people tattoo their own name on their body? Neither Matthew nor Kathy have ever been located, but one witness at the rest stop would say that she heard Kathy state she intended to go to California. If so, it's believed that she went through Utah to get there, and took Matthew with the intentions to raise him as her own. Roberta Elam, West Virginia, on June 13, 1977, in Wheeling, West Virginia, 26-year-old Roberta Elam, known as Sister Robin to her friends, started her day the same way she had been for the past few days, waking up, having silent prayer and meditation to contemplate taking her vows to become a nun. Roberta, who was deeply religious, had gotten a master's in theology from Fordham University before eventually settling down in West Virginia, where she traveled throughout the state, conducting adult religious education classes. But on this day, the woman known to be such a nice young lady by many would meet with tragedy. That morning at 10:30 a.m., Roberta left the Mount St. Joseph Mother House and walked about 75 yards to a field nearby, where she sat on a bench. Sometime between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., while contemplating her decision on becoming a nun, a man would sneak up behind her and attack her from behind. He started pulling her over the back of the park bench, which toppled over, and then dragged her about 40 feet away, where he then sexually assaulted her and proceeded to strangle her to death. The attack was brazen, because the bench had been facing a golf course, but it's believed he was extra careful and pulled her out of view before the assault. No golfers reported to have heard or seen anything. He then left her body and fled the area, leaving a groundskeeper to find Roberta's body about 1:50 p.m. She had been wearing street clothes, but some of those had been removed. Her blouse and bra had been pulled up, while her pants and underwear were pulled down. Her prayer book was set near the overturned bench. Police looked for anything that the suspect may have used to choke her with, and found nothing, and it was assumed he used his bare hands. The autopsy confirmed she had been sexually assaulted, but it also revealed that she did not have any defensive wounds, indicating that he incapacitated her before she had time to fight back. The police would take bloodhounds to the scene to search for the perpetrator, but they did not find any clues. But people did come forward with information about a suspicious car that was seen in the area at the time of the attack. That driver was also spotted, and police got a good enough description of him to make a pretty good sketch. He was a white man in his 30s with dark hair, dark eyes, and a dark beard, around 5'10" and 160 pounds, and he was unkempt. Some witnesses even said that he had a small brown dog with him. He drove a 1960s gray or blue Chevy Impala with rust spots and dents with 3 bumper stickers. One of these stickers said something about coal mining, and the other 2 were religious themed. He was seen exiting his car and walking across the embankment below the area where Roberta was found. Over the years, several suspects have been identified, but never conclusively linked. They also at first thought it could be the work of a serial killer who was operating over the border in Pennsylvania about 30 miles away, but he was eventually ruled out. But one suspect who was first cleared and then brought back to the forefront was a local resident named John Shoplack, who was originally ruled out because of his blood type, which was originally taken by the military and it didn't match the blood type at the crime scene. But blood samples from old military records have a high error rate, which brought police back to looking at him, and they found out a lot of suspicious things. An ex-girlfriend stated that John had choked her in the past, as well as hearing John say that he hated Catholics. He also was accused twice before of sexual assault. He even burglarized his own grandmother, cutting her finger off to steal a ring. And he even told a friend that he had killed a nun near a park, and that park was just a few miles away from where Roberta was really murdered. But most suspiciously, he told this same friend that she had been menstruating when he killed her, a fact known only by the police. He died in 2019, and police stated they were pursuing a tissue sample from the hospital he had been in to compare DNA. However, they never said anything else about this, leaving many to wonder if John has been officially cleared. Fort Mountain, Georgia. Fort Mountain is a mountain in northern Georgia that is known throughout the region as a great destination for hikers, but what some may not know is the ancient mystery that's attached to this mountain, and it's right there in the name, Fort Mountain. The park derives its name from an ancient 885-foot-long rock wall located on the peak. The zigzagging wall contains 29 pits scattered about them that are believed to have came from looters looking for artifacts. In addition is a set of ruins believed to be a gateway. It is known that the wall was made from local stones around the summit, and the highest parts are about 7 feet tall, but generally they are around 2 to 3 feet, and as wide as 16 feet in some spots. There are also small cylinders and stone rings, but all studies to try and find out its age, or who made it, has been difficult to say the least. A lot of modern day thoughts on it is it was constructed between 400 and 1500 AD, which is a pretty wide range. Others say that it just cannot be determined, which has obviously led to many legends. One which claims it's the remnants of several stone forts built by the legendary Welsh explorer Mayden in 1170, and the Cherokee claimed that a group of mysterious people we have discussed on an earlier video, that of the Moon-Eyed people, are responsible for its construction. Actually, they claim that the various ancient structures throughout the South are due to the Moon-Eyed people, and supposedly a temple had once stood inside the fort, which contained a giant stone snake with ruby eyes. There's even speculation that the walls were built by Hernando de Soto on his fated conquest, in an effort to defend against the Creek Indians around 1540. However, de Soto was only in the general area for about 2 weeks, and he probably never made it to the mountain anyways, making it not likely. But maybe my favorite theory is that it was a honeymoon haven for Cherokee newlyweds. Finally, one of the less glamorous ones, it was built as a defensive measure by one of 2 Indian tribes who were at war. But that doesn't make sense either, because it's so small in areas that it's practically worthless as a defensive measure, leaving historians to speculate that it was something for ceremonial function, yet no one is for sure. Gloria White Moore McDonald, Arkansas. On January 26, 2001, in Rich Mountain, Arkansas, a 68-year-old woman named Gloria White Moore McDonald and her husband, 63-year-old Daniel, along with her husband's son from a previous marriage and his son's girlfriend, headed out for a hike in Queen Wilhelmina State Park around 12:25 p.m. The group would start making their way down the trail towards a spot called Lover's Leap, but very quickly into the trail, they found themselves delayed by several downed trees that had gotten blown across the trail. It was then that Gloria decided, you know what, this isn't for me. She would tell the other 3 that she wasn't going to go any further, and would instead go back to the gift shop and restaurant while the others finished the hike. However, the 3 returned about 30 minutes later and realized Gloria wasn't around, although their car had not been moved, as well as her purse and other belongings, which still sat in the car. After doing a quick search for her, they decided to call the police, as well as the park rangers, who also helped search but could not find her. And I really wish I had more to tell you about this one, but the fact is, there's just not much to tell. This has to be one of the most bizarre disappearances I've ever covered. Even the police threw up their hands and said they have no idea how she could have vanished. She had only went 150 yards into the trail before turning around, and that's not very far. At first, a few of her friends thought that her disappearance could be related to her job, as she was a reporter for a newspaper that wrote stories about court proceedings. It was thought that maybe one of the articles had rubbed someone the wrong way, but after going through all her case notes, they found nothing that hinted towards that. The family started to speculate that she walked up on an illegal activity like a drug transaction, and those people killed her. But again, I come back to the 150 yards. It just doesn't seem possible that she could have walked onto a drug deal that quick. The sheriff would state that there were only about 6 park employees there, and that only one room had been rented out. And I assume all these people were cleared, or this wouldn't be a mystery. They would also bring out bloodhounds that followed a scent, which led down to a paved road below the lodge, and they lost the scent there, which has led detectives to believe she voluntarily got in a car and left, or she was forced. And if you're thinking that she had an accident and just hasn't been found, I would normally agree with that, because her family and friends have said she was not the outdoor type at all. But according to the sheriff, they have taken dogs all over the mountain looking for remains, and not one thing was found. This hasn't stopped speculation from online sleuths though, as there are wide-ranging theories about what happened to her. Some believe she got lost and fell off a cliff, some say she was kidnapped, some even think a Sasquatch killed her, while others take the view that she ran away and was picked up by a friend, and they attribute this to her husband's behavior afterwards, in which he basically stated that no one would abduct her for sexual purposes because she wasn't pretty, which is definitely an odd thing to say. He also moved to Florida after the incident, claiming he didn't want to stay in a town where he was known as the guy whose wife was killed on a mountain. Again, very odd. However, her husband Daniel did demand to take a polygraph almost immediately after to clear his name so they could start the search for her, and he did pass it. But following that line of thinking, police have questioned if she even made it to the park that day. There is only one other person outside the family, a park maintenance worker, that said he thought he might have seen her in a yellow jacket, but he wasn't sure. But if she did die on that mountain, a yellow jacket would be easy to find. To this day, no one knows what happened to Gloria. Mysteriously vanished Conestee, North Carolina. Have you ever heard the story about a lost colony of North Carolina? No, I'm not talking about Roanoke. I'm talking about the other one. Yes, there was another one that most people don't know about. In 1725, as the British were still heavily exploring the American East Coast, they would make their way deep into the western part of North Carolina. On their journey, they would come across a Cherokee settlement known as Conestee, or Canasta. The British would stop and try to converse with them. They would document their findings and then move on, and it would be another 50 years before the Brits returned. Hey, they were real busy at that time. When British explorers would return in 1777 and stopped in to see Conestee once again, the proud people that once stood in this populated village had vanished. And I know it had been 50 years, but there wasn't one sign left of these people. Not to mention, it was the only settlement between villages in the South Carolina foothills and North Carolina mountains further to the west. It just didn't make sense. The British would eventually meet up with some of the other Cherokee shortly after, and they would ask, what happened to the Conestee settlement that had been documented just 50 years ago? It was here that the Cherokee would tell them that the lost city of Canasta, which sat on the French Broad River, was one day approached by 2 strangers. These strangers looked like other Cherokee, and they made their way in to talk to the chief. He would ask them what settlement they were from, and they would say, quote, "We are of your people, and our town is close at hand, but you have never seen it. Here you have wars and sickness, with enemies on every side. And after a while, a stronger enemy will come to take your country from you. We are always happy, and we have come to invite you to live with us in our town over there." End quote. The man then pointed to a place, now called Pilot Mountain, in northwestern North Carolina. He would go on to tell this chief that although they are not immortal, and although food is not always plentiful, they are always at peace and never in danger. So the chief of the Conestee would call a tribal council, and they voted to follow the strangers, whom they believed to be Cherokee relatives. And here's where things get weird, because when they get to Pilot Mountain, the 2 guides brought them into a cave, and they came up to a rock, which opened like a door. Inside this door lay wide open country and a town. Houses ranged in 2 rows, from east to west. The mountain people lived in the houses on the south side, and new houses had already been built for the Conestee people. Now here's the key to this. One of the men that had tailed along had actually just been visiting the Conestee settlement that day when all this happened. He had never planned to move with them, but he did want to see where they were going. And when this man went to leave, they did not want him to go, but he did anyways. And when he left, the door in the mountain disappeared and became solid rock, and those people were never seen again. But this man would go back and tell the rest of the Cherokee this story. Now you and I know that this story is most likely mythical, But the native city of Connesty was very real, and it was documented by the Brits, and they also recorded that, from what they could gather, this settlement vanished in the 1750s, just 20 years after their first contact with them. So what happened? Well, theories on this one are scarce, but one has pointed out that it was most likely a nicer way of explaining that the entire settlement had perished due to disease. Think of it as a Native American heaven. Those people went to a better place in the mountain where it's peaceful, and they're doing good and they're never under threat. Now they won't have to suffer anymore. It could have been just to explain a horrible tragedy away. However, this is just a theory, and no one really knows what happened to Connesty. Walter Rice, South Carolina. In 1990, a man named Walter Rice moved from Connecticut to McCormick, South Carolina, where he essentially lived as a hermit. But in March 1993, two men would attempt to break into Walter's trailer, as it had long looked abandoned, and they figured the old man had moved. But they would be in for a bit of a surprise, because after smashing a window and walking to the back bedroom, they discovered the body of a decomposing man on the floor, and it was Walter. They understandably panicked and fled the trailer, yet they did not call anyone. Instead, one of the men would tell his girlfriend about it later, and she would call the police, pretending to be a concerned neighbor, stating that the man's window had been broken. The medical examiner arrived on the scene and discovered that Walter had died from a heart attack over a year before, in February 1992. They also looked back at records and discovered that he had been in a car accident about a week before, which probably contributed to his heart attack. Now, how did no one know that he had been deceased? Well, Walter did not talk with anyone and never had visitors. His electric and TV had been turned off due to not paying the bill, and all his mail was eventually returned to sender. A probate judge was given the task to search through Walter's possessions, and he found that Walter had $145,000 and no heirs were found. The case will be featured on Unsolved Mysteries in hopes that someone might come forward and claim the inheritance. The show generated lots of tips, but all turned out to be false. A deeper search into Walter's background revealed he never married and never had children. He had worked as a cook at an inn in Connecticut from 1973 to 1983, and he lived without expense at the hotel, but his work colleagues hardly knew anything about him. However, they did discover that at two hospitals in South Carolina, he listed relatives as Jane Rice and James Edwards. However, Jane Rice was most likely a fake name, and James Edwards was actually a neighbor of Walter's. They then found the weirdest part of this mystery, Walter's passport, which was traced back to the CIA, who was then contacted but would never comment on the matter. On this passport, he had visited several exotic locations. Even more confusing was his social security number, which was a fraud, and his birth certificate listed a hospital that had no record of his birth. To this day, no one is for sure who Walter really was. Betty Gail Brown, Kentucky. On October 26, 1961, 19-year-old Betty Gail Brown was studying at Forward Hall on the Transylvania College campus in Lexington, Kentucky. Around midnight, she would leave intending to head home. However, she never made it, and her friends would report her missing. And around 3 a.m., a police officer would come up to Betty's car, sitting in front of the old Morrison building on campus. He had been checking campus locations after an all-units broadcast was made to officers on duty about a missing co-ed, which was Betty. But he took a peek inside her car, and he would find her, but she appeared to have been strangled to death with her bra. She also had a head wound, believed to have occurred when the attacker forced her head into the dashboard. The scene was then closed off, and an investigation was done. Betty's body was taken in for an autopsy which found no sign of sexual assault, and the police found nothing else, just zero leads, and the case quickly went cold. And it's not like they didn't try. At first, they had 25 detectives and police officers working around the clock searching for evidence, and they made the case a top priority for 2 to 3 years, never finding a motive or a clue. Nothing was stolen. Even her car keys had been thrown into the back seat of the vehicle. But 4 years later, something strange would happen. A man way out in Klamath Falls, Oregon, named Alex Arnold, would be arrested for public intoxication, and while in police custody, he would confess to killing Betty. According to him, he was drunk and approached Betty's car and found her making out with another woman. He then asked both women for a light for his cigarette. According to Arnold, the women started cussing him out, so he reached into the car on the driver's side and grabbed Betty's hair and smashed her head into the dashboard, leaving a bloody stain. The other girl then fled and Arnold strangled Betty with her own bra, although it should be noted, when he gave this confession, he was going through withdrawal symptoms and was showing suicidal tendencies. However, police took the confession and placed him under arrest for murder. He would later try to back out of this confession, but it was too late. He would sit in jail for the next year, waiting for the case to go to trial. But this trial, well, there wasn't much in the way of evidence. The best the prosecution could do was place him in Lexington at the time of the murder, and within the general vicinity, where he was known to sleep on the park benches in town. The prosecution tried to pitch that Arnold knew things only the killer would have known, but everything from this investigation had been released to the public, and everyone knew all the details. So there was nothing that Arnold knew that practically everyone in Lexington didn't already know, and he was acquitted. Some people to this day still believe that Arnold was the guilty man, but others think he was just a drunk and maybe wanted attention. Not to mention his story about Betty's alleged lesbian lover. I get that this was the 60s, and she may have not wanted to disclose that, but wouldn't this woman have contacted police at some point? Not to mention, Betty kept a journal that discussed the guys that she was dating, which pretty much ruled out Arnold's story. And besides, detectives came up with a new theory. Arnold was not there looking for a cigarette. In fact, he probably wasn't there at all. Instead, Betty most likely let someone she knew into her car, and for whatever reason, things went bad. Who that was, they were never able to say, and 60 years later, it remains unsolved. DeSoto's Lost Treasure, South Carolina. This is the second time we mention the famed explorer Hernando DeSoto, who made the first European expedition deep into the modern-day United States, traveling through Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and most likely Arkansas. He was also the first European to document the Mississippi River. It was an incredibly vast undertaking, but he mainly did it for two reasons: gold, and to find a passage to China or to the Pacific coast, but mainly the gold. And that's where this mystery comes into play. Along their travels, they would encounter many Native Americans, and luckily for DeSoto, he would actually find a Spaniard named Juan Ortiz, who had been living with a Native American tribe in Tampa. He had been captured by the Uzita previously, before he made his escape to a more peaceful tribe known as the Makoso. While living there, he learned their language and would act as DeSoto's translator. Ortiz would then use his language skills to recruit guides from tribes along their route, but they still end up being ambushed by natives along the way, especially since they had been seasoned food from natives and taken slaves quite often. So it should be no surprise that DeSoto wasn't opposed to roughing up the natives for information leading to gold. The first information gained would come when they met the natives in the Florida Western Panhandle, who said, "Yeah, sure, there's gold," and pointed them towards the northeast into Georgia and South Carolina, which was probably just an attempt to get the Spanish to leave, which they did. Now, on April 21st, 1540, DeSoto would pass over the Savannah River and into modern-day South Carolina in search of this gold, after they failed to find any in Georgia. And according to legend, DeSoto came across a tribe who was using gold they had fashioned into jewelry, as well as finding golden tools like an axe. And if you play Stardew Valley, you know how valuable golden axes are. So DeSoto was now excited and would find this gold by any means. And this tribe was led by a queen who DeSoto would call La Senora. DeSoto would then abduct and threaten to torture her and her followers if they did not guide them to the gold mine where this had came from. So having no choice, they end up taking them into western South Carolina, probably Pickens County. However, this backfired as the neighboring tribes heard about what was going on and began attacking DeSoto's men along the way. Several soldiers were killed, and food became scarce, and morale was low. Eventually, the queen and her subordinates spotted their chance to escape, and they did. DeSoto, having lost his hostage and fearing a mutiny, abandoned the quest to find this mine and headed west. Now this has left us with the mystery. Did this gold mine actually exist? Scholars believe that it most likely did, since there was an abundance of gold in that village, and was also found throughout South Carolina. And there's also been gold deposits found in both Pickens and York counties. DeSoto was probably just a day or two away. However, there is another mystery which ties in with this one, and that's the ghost town of Mayuka. And we have precious info about this town, other than it was started by some German settlers who were interested in gold mining in the 1800s. and it became big enough to get a post office before totally being abandoned by 1907. But unlike other ghost towns, we don't even know where this one was located. The only thing we do know was it was about 7 miles north of Tamasee, and in this area, there is a waterfall nearby called Mauka, and although it's spelled different than the ghost town Mauka, it still sounds the same. So is it possible these German settlers found the mine and it was at this area, and they managed to keep it secret before taking all the gold and vanishing themselves? Sybil Brumley, Louisiana, on April 28, 1997, in Mansfield, Louisiana, 76-year-old Sybil Brumley lived alone in the home that her and her husband had once shared. He had died some 20 years earlier, leaving the widow to spend much of her time with her kids and grandchildren. Although being 76, she looked much younger, and she also got around great, continuing to work at the DeSoto Sheriff's Office as a part-time secretary. But it's on this day in April that she didn't make it into work, and the Sheriff's Department, probably fearing that the senior woman may have experienced a health issue, drove to her home to check on her. So they must have been stunned to arrive and discover that the front door had been kicked in, along with the screen door which had been cut out. Once detectives arrived on scene, they would walk in to find the home in total disarray. Plants had been knocked over, the furniture was moved around, the bedroom had shoes everywhere, which indicated that whoever did this had reached his hand up onto the top of the closet and just started throwing them out of the way in a hurry. And even worse, Sybil was missing. So was her purse and some clothing. It appeared that whoever had done this had ransacked through the house looking for one specific thing. What that was is still unknown. Investigators obviously believe she was taken against her will, but who would do this? Sybil was well loved in the community and was very active in church. There has never been a suspect named, and this case doesn't really have a lot of info. Compounding the issue is most of the original investigators have passed away, but it is believed that the person knew her and had been into the home before. This is because Sybil had put a bar across the back door of the home, which would have been really hard to get through, meaning this person must have knew that and came in the front. As far as who, that is the question. One thing that has been noted in this case though, is Sybil was dating multiple men at the time. Could one of these have been responsible? Like I said, there's just not much on this one. With that, we come to the end of part 4 of the Southern Unsolved Mystery Iceberg Explained. We have 3 more layers to go, and I know it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed.